attending. I also happen to be the facilitator for your sessions. I will be facilitating the sessions that you will attend probably for much of the semester, because really the basis upon which I became the project leader is because I'm a multi-methodologist, if that can be said in one word. But I have spent probably the last 20 years or so working with different methodologies across the qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method paradigms. So this week, I get to expose you to all the thoughts and thinkings and the approaches to how you select a methodology and a design for your study, and also speak you through the characteristics of the different methodologies. So when you're selecting something or deciding not to select it, you do so on the basis of a very in-depth understanding of that particular methodology. How the sessions run, and you will have probably understood that we have, during the course of the week, we have 5 distinct sessions. 2 are dedicated to quantitative research methodologies, 2 are dedicated to qualitative research methodologies, and we have a final one that looks at mixed methods research. Just for purposes of understanding how this runs, please be aware that I will probably turn off my camera in the next minute or 2, just so that I can put the presentation up, the presentation that you're going to be looking at. And this presentation is rather long. We're looking at selecting a methodology and a design, and in particular, we're looking at quantitative research methodologies. So those are particularly laborious because there's usually a lot of background information that people have not, or in my experience, people have not been exposed to. So I will spend a fair amount of time describing and clarifying some basic principles, which one would hope all of you have a good grasp of. But unfortunately, the research on masters and doctoral students suggests that most of the students don't have the necessary level of understanding of basic principles. And for that reason, when we kind of layer on additional things for you to understand, it becomes hard, because the foundation upon which it is built is not as solid as we have assumed. So with this particular program, we make no assumptions whatsoever. The only assumption we assume or make is that we assume that all of you want to be supported to develop your research skills from the very, very bottom all the way to the very top. So you will see the structure in which things are presented speaks very much to that ethos. And yeah, so I ask you to enjoy the next hour and a bit with me. And then after that, we'll get an opportunity. There will be opportunities for you to ask questions. But for now, remember, this presentation will be made available to everybody and anybody who wants to look at it. The structure of how I present things for those who are meeting me for the first time is that I will begin the session with an overview of some conceptual things that need to be clarified, some basic things that I think need to be understood going forward. Then I will walk you through the actual presentation of the material that is promised. And just for ease of reference after the fact, I always make sure that I add in a few slides here and there that I won't reflect on during the presentation, but I put on in any case, so that when you're on your own and you're self-guiding, they can kind of help to just bring things together much more seamlessly. So that's exactly what will happen. So there's quite a number of slides that are like that I will point to and ask you to have a visual appreciation of, but in actual fact, I will not speak too much to them. Without taking much more time, I want to basically take us to the presentation of the day. And remember, once again, this is a two-part series. So it's a two-part series that looks at quantitative research designs and quantitative research methods. And I will walk you through that. This is going to take a second or two to load up. You will appreciate, or just for purposes of stating the obvious, you will know that there are three paradigm spaces that people talk about in research, and those are really to do with qualitative, the qualitative paradigm, the quantitative paradigm, and the mixed methods paradigm. So today and tomorrow, we will be focusing on this session, and the next session will be focusing on the quantitative paradigm. And that, of course, allows you to work through all the aspects that relate to qualitative research methodologies and designs thereafter. So, as always, it's important that we begin by just identifying what the hope is for you by the time we complete this session. So, if you look at the session outcomes that you have in front of you, the first thing is that we need you, and I've omitted some outcomes that are assumed. We of course need you to be able to identify what quantitative methodologies are by comparison to qualitative ones, and in that same vein by comparison to mixed method research. We also need you to identify and describe the most common quantitative data collection approaches. Also be able to analyze the different data collection methods that are used within quantitative research for you to have a better grasp of where their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And the reason we do this, apart from it being useful for you if you're choosing a particular method, it also serves as a basis for you to decide why you opted to not choose something, or why you chose a particular option versus another. It's all to do with the interplay between the weaknesses and strengths of that particular choice. We are going to expose you to the concept of population, the whole sampling elements to this. And remember, these session learning outcomes are outcomes for both the first part of quantitative research methods and the second part. So the issue around sample size strategies and all those things is something that we speak to much more explicitly in the second presentation. So you won't see it in this very particular presentation, but it is promised nonetheless. We're also going to introduce you to different formulae that are used for determining sample size. And then, of course, there are different typologies within qualitative research that need, there are different typologies within qualitative research or quantitative research that need to be spoken to, and you will be introduced to the dominant ones so that you have a clarity about what is out there. And as with all sessions of this type, I cannot exhaustively cover everything that is possible, but what I can do is give you some foundational clarification about how you decipher different types of quantitative methodologies that are out there. So basically, I give you the key to open the door to, even though I don't explicitly walk you in, and that is literally all that is necessary really for anybody who's being taught about this, because once you have figured out the key, the rest will be self-revealing. I say once again, I always take us back to making sure that we understand and never lose sight of the fact that we are in the space of research, and it comes with it. It has inherent expectations that govern everything we do, as long as that thing is related to the activity of research. So once again, I say to you, and I've defined these concepts in previous sessions, that all that we're doing is part of understanding what is part of getting to the bottom of research. So when we speak about quantitative methodologies, we're talking about them as elements of the process we call research. So we need to always understand what the implied expectations are, and that these expectations are embedded in anything that I ask of you or describe. So I don't need to keep repeating them over and over, because we appreciate that if the topic I'm teaching you about is a topic related to research, it must therefore follow that certain behaviors and expectations go hand in hand with whatever it is that you're being exposed to. So even as we speak about quantitative methodologies, we must appreciate that they are acted on or understood in the terms of research. And research is a systematic activity. So everything that you do or every decision you make should be guided and informed by a system. It should come from a particular system. Whatever that system is may differ from point to point, but every decision you make should come from some theoretical or empirical system that you're trying to follow. So if you see yourself doing anything and it's a thumbsuck, you know that you've definitely got something that you're doing which isn't right and isn't consistent with the expectations of research activity. So never allow yourself to find yourself doing a thumbsuck, because that is the one thing that research is not about. That everything we do has to have a systems-based orientation or genesis. So also we talk about research being rigorous, and rigor refers to the fact that it seeks to look at all the available options before arriving at a particular decision or choice. So when we say that something is rigorous, we are saying that it has allowed itself to be tested in every way before a final decision was made. So when we talk about qualitative methodologies, quantitative methodologies, or the process of selecting a design, we expect you to be rigorous in the way that you approach it. And being rigorous means you understand all the options that are available, and you systematically look at each and decide why one is a better fit than the other, and so forth. And to do that, you can only do that if you understand all the options that are available and the choices that are at play. And that is the reason, pretty much the big reason why we have this program that we've exposed you to. The program that exposes you to all the different methodologies, in the understanding and expectation that even when you choose one specific methodology, you do so after having a very, very intimate knowledge of the ones that you chose not to go with. Then, of course, research is about a logical investigation, and that investigation's primary goal is to answer a set of research questions that relate to a problem or a phenomena of interest. So we are saying that, as always, your study has to be about questions that relate to some way of understanding a problem or a phenomena that is of global or universal interest. So that's what research is about, and therefore everything that we discuss up to this point or going forward assumes that you will always operate from a systematic basis with rigor at the center of your way of thinking, logical approaching to things being the center of how you approach things, and then of course that you're doing this all towards the greater aim of answering a set of questions or a question that you have in relation to a phenomena or a problem of interest. And so we know that, as I've said already, that research, regardless of what it is we're talking about, it has these characteristics of being systematic, rigorous, disciplined, and its search for an understanding of what is going on in relation to this phenomena that you would have chosen as your phenomena that you are interested in. So, and then what we will now need to also take account of is that all throughout the research process or the process of doing any research, everything that you ever do as a researcher is make decisions upon decisions. And you decide what methodology you use, you decide what set of theoretical lens you will apply, you decide what method of data collection you will use, you decide what data collection approach you will utilize. And if you were to reflect this as a decision tree, you would show that if you give someone 10 people the same topic to research, chances are they will make, and none of them will have the same study because they all make different choices at different places. And there are so many places at which choices get made that the chances of the same decision or choice being made by researchers all the way through is actually very remote. And as such, it means that every decision you make, you have to defend, you have to make sure that you can explain the logical basis upon which you were directing yourself. Now, in front of you, you've got some basic things that I expect you already know, but I've put them up there for you. They are the differences between qualitative and quantitative research, and in terms of the way that their aim or their purposes are reflected, in terms of how the research process is spoken about, in terms of how data is gathered, in terms of how each paradigm analyzes the data that it has in front of it, how the findings from that particular space are looked at. All of those are different between quantitative and qualitative studies. And you will notice that quantitative research is about seeking explanations and being able to make cause and effect predictions so that generalizations can be drawn. It's really about how does A cause B? That's what, or does A cause B? What is the relationship between A and B? So that we can draw some generalizations that help us to predict future behavior in relation to the thing that we're interested in. So that is what quantitative research is about. Its sister qualitative research is less about seeking direct causal explanations. It's more about just understanding and gaining in-depth understanding of complex phenomena without necessarily making conclusions about causal inferences that may exist. So those are the basic things, but much of what I'm describing here should be pre-existing knowledge for you, and if it isn't, I ask that you take this particular slide that you have and you pause it. You just pause it for a minute or two and just look at how qualitative and quantitative research differ from each other. And really spend a bit more time on this so that you can start to clarify in your head how the two will begin to look different And you will also be able to tell if say your current study that you're interested in is about a causal relationship and clarifying that, then you will know that it's more likely to be quantitative and so forth. But I ask you, if you want to just pause the video for a while so you can just look at this. Now, the next thing that is also background information, and it is background information, but it is important information I want you to have some awareness of. And remember, so far, as I've said, my session is focused on giving you an understanding of, some principles and things that you should be aware of before we get into the actual work on quantitative methodologies and designs. So this is the first, it's another one of the things that should be background information. This was covered for those of you who've attended previous sessions. It was described before, but if it has not been, you've not been exposed to it, I suggest that you also pause the slide and you go and look at something they call Sackett's hierarchy of evidence. There's a reference at the end of this presentation that directs you to this. And this hierarchy of evidence basically is a pyramid that allows us to categorize different types of research data so that we can get a sense of what data is much more scientifically credible than the next. So basically, it's a tool for measuring the quality of evidence that comes from different types of data. So for example, if you received evidence through background information or expert opinion, say if you came to see me and you were interested in a topic and you believed I was an expert, and I sat with you for 2 hours and I just told you my opinions about it, that would be the equivalent of expert opinion. According to this hierarchy, according to Sackett, that represents the lowest level of credibility in terms of the quality of evidence. And it kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, a person's individual opinion is subject to all sorts of subjective influences, that it is likely that the information that they're sharing is biased in a way that changes or taints the quality of that information. But of course, if you are looking at case-controlled studies, or if you have reports that are written up as published reports, those published reports are a slightly better level of information than someone's spoken word. So this hierarchy identifies it as such, and basically says that, look, if someone is looking at a report and they say a report says do this, and then an individual you meet gives you their expert opinion and tells you to go a different way from the report, the idea is that you should assess the quality of the information from the report as being of a higher quality than that which came from someone's biased expert opinion. And what this hierarchy then asserts is the position that systematic reviews, which are at the very top, represent the highest quality of evidence that one can seek to have. So when you're looking for papers and you're looking for things in quantitative research, remember, this is just about quantitative research, no other form. If in quantitative research you are looking for paper and you want evidence that can be seen to be very high quality, to be very credible, then you look for systematic reviews as the basis of your information. And the further down the pyramid you go, the lower the level of quality of information. So this hierarchy is just a useful way for you to segregate out and differentiate between sources of evidence. And now, the next concept that is spoken about in quantitative research is this idea that in quantitative research, the samples that eventually become the subject of any study are always treated as samples that are of one background, the fact that they are homogeneous. And this concept of them being homogeneous is a central principle within quantitative research. And that principle being that when you select a sample of 60 things and you want to test them, in quantitative research, there's an agreement and understanding that you have put them into a singular sample because you truly assess them to be homogeneous. So this homogeneity, which is this concept, is at the center of one of the pre-existing conditions of quantitative research, that when you choose something and you indicate that it belongs to a particular sample, you have accepted that it is homogeneous or it is affected by similar extraneous variables that might affect it. So basically, you will find that this is different from qualitative research, which assumes that even things that are similar are not the same. So in qualitative research, they will look at people who have the same challenges, and even though they have those same challenges, it will be assumed that they are different by virtue of being affected differently or possessing background information that's different. That heterogeneous nature of these subjects means that they are accepted to be different no matter how similar they appear to be from the surface. And that is at the very center of qualitative research. But at the very center of quantitative research, you have this concept that everything that is sampled and has similar variables or background variables is of the same background, so it's homogeneous. And of course, once you assume that the thing you're studying is of a similar background, then what goes with that is the awareness and understanding that the findings of your study will apply to that very same type of person. So homogeneity of a sample limits one's ability to generalize their findings to other populations that are different from that which was being studied. So that's one other concept challenge. Now, the next thing that is occurring, the next thing that I have to introduce you to as part of your pre-readiness to understanding quantitative research is this thing around independent and dependent variables. So in quantitative research, there are two types of variables that people deal with generally. There's one that they call an independent variable and the other that they call a dependent variable. And essentially, one is a mirror image of the other. So if you understand one, you are in a position to work out what the other one is. So for the purposes of clarity, I think I will start by explaining what a dependent variable is, because it just is easier to work from that. So if you remember in all your quantitative studies, or any study for that matter, but more specifically the quantitative ones, there is a particular thing that you're interested in, and there's a particular outcome that you're interested in. So if I'm studying examination performance and whether people's gender, their age, and all other things are important to this, to their performance, it then is understood that that variable of performance, their examination performance, is the variable that I'm interested in. That becomes the outcome of interest, and that is the dependent variable. So if all of you have a study, and maybe your study is looking at the rate of violence in teenagers, and whether watching television, having a violent parent, or whether being from a violent neighborhood, whether all those factors have any impact on someone's propensity to being violent, then we can conclude that the dependent variable in that example is the propensity to violence. Then the independent variables relate to those things that you manipulate in order to change the outcome, in order to change the dependent variable. So essentially, what is meant, what the focus is with regard to dependent and independent variables, is the fact that the dependent variable focuses on that outcome that you are primarily interested in. So if your study is about student success, then the dependent variable is student success. If your study is about rate of violence, your dependent variable is a rate of violence. If your study is about non-attendance or attendance rates for anything in particular, then your dependent variable is that your dependent variable is that outcome that is the center of what you are interested in explicitly. So the independent variable, as I said, is the mirror opposite of a dependent variable. So if the dependent variable is about the outcome, then the independent variable is about those factors or variables that you manipulate to affect the outcome. So the independent variables can be those things that you manipulate so you can affect the independent variable. So if I'm interested in student success, and I say student success depends on someone's intelligence, it depends on how hard they work, it depends on whether they come from a good home, whether they're rich, all those things about being wealthy, about the home they come from, all those are independent variables. And so in a particular study, particularly in the study you are likely to be doing, you will have a number of independent variables because they are the things and factors that you're interested in playing around with to see how they affect the dependent variable. So in your study, you are likely to have a single one dependent variable, but instead you will have many independent variables. So please take note of that there's independent variables are the things that you manipulate to affect the result or outcome that you're interested in, and the dependent variable is that outcome that you're interested in. So anyone who ever asks what's an independent and a dependent variable, the answer is as I have provided to you, and you may need to play this over and over and over and over again to get a sense of this. Right, so the next thing that we need to infer is this whole idea of cause and effect relationships. The first cause and effect, and this is a central concept within quantitative research, this whole idea of cause and effect relationships. This idea that, once again, remember, quantitative research is about understanding, is generally interested in understanding and clarifying the cause and the effect of particular actions. It's about understanding those relationships that can tell you how A causes B or how B is caused by A and so forth. So for you to infer that A can cause B, there are certain conditions that need to be met. And there are three of them in particular within quantitative research. And these are important, but somewhat simplistic, but nonetheless critical things that need to exist. So when people do quantitatively minded studies, they need to do so on the basis of, when they do quantitatively minded studies, they need to do so on the basis of clarity and understanding about certain things. They need to do so on the basis of understanding that you can't explore a relationship between A and B if there's no evidence that A or B are indeed associated with each other in any shape or form. So you cannot infer causality between A and B if all the pre-existing evidence we have tells us that A and B are not in any way connected to each other. Then, so what we're saying is that the first condition is that the causal variable, i.e. the independent variable, and the result, the dependent variable, must be associated with each other for us to even begin to be interested in whether A is related to B. You have to have some understanding that age is related to performance, for example, for you to even want to seek a cause and effect relationship between the two. Then, of course, there's also another precondition, and that precondition is that the cause must precede the effect. So what we're saying is that if you're studying whether A is related to an outcome B occurring, we have to be fairly sure that in its natural appearance, A will appear generally much before B occurs. Because if we have no evidence that A occurs before B, then we have a problem in that we are likely to end up with us trying to explore something that is shown to not really have a cause and effect line of existence. Then, of course, the next thing is that if we're asking whether A causes B, we have to be sure that the relationship that we are exploring is not explainable in any other way. Okay, so next story is the story around us understanding quantitative research, correlational research, causal research, and comparative research. And I will pause the recording now so that we do the second section of this, just looking at the very different types of research that exist. Let me